Main Event Maniacs, presented by the Juice Box.
The main event can make or break a show. It doesn't matter how good the undercard is. If the main event is a stinker, the entire event can be tainted.
Here on Main Event Maniacs, we will revisit some of the most memorable main events in sports entertainment history, both good and bad, across various promotions and eras of professional wrestling. I'm Jay, and happy to be joined by the planet to my flock, good friend and co-host Brian. Brian, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. This is a topic I am excited about. Um, I, I was a TNA fan from the very first show. I remember watching the first show and thinking, this is okay. And then just deciding to go ahead with the second show, which was fantastic. And then was hooked from there on. And I got most every weekly pay-per-view that they did. I only missed a handful of them because of prior commitments or something like that. But what we're about to talk about today is probably the greatest build they ever did in the early years of TNA and the biggest disappointment, I would say, that ever came out of that as well. And we'll get into that for sure. But we're discussing arguably the biggest match in the early days of TNA, like I said, the Wednesday pay-per-view era. This is Raven meeting Jeff Jarrett for the NWA Heavyweight Championship.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, the fun part of this Main Event Maniacs is I was not around for this. I was not watching TNA at this time. I was actually kind of waned it a little bit out of watching wrestling for a few years here, and this was not on my radar. I knew it existed, but I didn't really pick into TNA until they went to like the multi-sided ring
Okay.
instead of
Hmm.
the square, and even then, it was just a little bit here and there. And I've watched more TNA since I've known you all the years that we've known each other, kind of in retrospect, and a little bit of what was happening in the latter years. But I don't know that I'm like too brand specific, or if there was a real reason for it. I was just doing other things at that point, and at that point WCW was gone,
Yep.
and WWE was not carrying my attention. So
Yeah.
I would catch in on Mania or something here and there, and I would kind of keep up with like who's the champion now, but I didn't know any of this was happening. I knew both of these wrestlers because though they had been in WCW and they had been, in other things I had seen, so I knew about it, but I had heard tale of their feud and this match and how the big build for it was. And then, as you said, there was a lot of consternation about the ending and about how it went
Yeah.
down. And that still holds to this day, oddly enough.
Yeah.
Is researching for this, I was kind of blown away that people still feel very strongly. There's a lot of hashtag thoughts about this match, Brian.
There is
And
a whole episode that Jeff Jarrett does on his podcast about this one match.
that's
Um,
wild.
yeah, because it still resonates with people, and I'll tell you, I'm part of a group on Facebook that was there that night. They were
Nice.
a massive section at the entrance. Every time a wrestler came down, they were on the right hand side of the wrestler. That whole section was filled with people. They called themselves the heel section, and they always cheered for the bad guys during all the matches, right? And they continue on to this day in a Facebook group and doing some. I think they might have a podcast or something that they do, and some other things that they all do. But they
That's awesome. Like
this match has a good history for that group.
it's awesome that people like still get together and think about this all that years later. I mean, we're doing this. It's a retrospective kind of podcast, and that's what makes it fun. But it's neat that people still feel strongly about this, and I
Hmm.
liken it to the way that I probably geek out and feel about the Steamboat Flair trilogy
Yeah.
in 1989. In fact, one of those like clips popped up on my Instagram reel the other day that was the finish of the Chi-Town Rumble match. And I've seen that I don't know how many times, Brian, and I sat there for 5 minutes and watched it
Yeah.
because I just identify strongly with that. It was a formidable time in my life, and was really into wrestling, and I feel that way about that the way people feel about this match and other things. And so I think that's cool. I'm always down for, hey, you like what you like, and then we'll get into it and decide what we think of it as we get through the night here. But it's fun for me this time to come at this knowing some of the characters, but not really knowing the company, not knowing the promotion, and not knowing where it was at
Yeah.
this point. And unlike some of our previous episodes, there's not a ton out there about it other than like fan reaction. So what you'll hear from me tonight is me putting together my own perceptions, but also things that I've gathered from different corners of the old internet here to try to give you a sense of what was going on in the
Yeah.
show and stuff. But I want to ask you this though, because I'm fascinated by this idea of the Wednesday night pay-per-view. Like,
Mhm.
when did that become a thing? Like, how did that come about?
So WCW obviously went under. Um, Vince McMahon made it very clear that Jeff Jarrett was not invited to the WWF at the time, right? And he was just looking for something to do. And his father was a former promoter in Memphis. His grandmother used to run concession stands for years. I mean, he's a third generation in the business, right? And they were just talking one day, and I believe it was he, Bob Ryder, and his dad were all on a fishing trip, and they just started talking about what if we started our own promotion, and what would we do, and how could we change the model, like, because getting TV would have been almost impossible, and it proved to be for a long time. For them to get TV was almost impossible, and they just decided to work on some ideas, and this was the idea they came up with. It was originally going to be Tuesday night wrestling, and it was TNA for Tuesday night action, but they couldn't get clearance for Tuesday night, so they had to move it to Wednesday. They kept the name, and then Vince Russo, of all people, came up with the name Total Nonstop Action to continue with the lettering that they were using. So that's kind of how it really got started, and it was a risk, right? And they didn't know how it would go. Who wants to plop down the money? Their thought was WWF at the time was giving you 3 hours on pay-per-view a month. If you bought their pay-per-views, they were 2 hours long. There was 4 a month. They were giving you 8 hours for approximately the same money. So they thought, if people think about it that way, maybe they'd be more inclined to buy it. And so that's kind of where it was. Me, I was a huge WCW guy, right? And so when WCW got bought and WWF took them over, I didn't like that. And so I was looking for something to watch.
An alternative.
I bought the WWA pay-per-views that McManus in Australia did. They brought a bunch of WCW guys to those. And this was announced, and I was excited because it was going to have some of the WCW characters. Scott Hall was going to be one of them, and Jeff Jarrett, and a few other people that we would know. We're going to be part of it, and a bunch of younger guys were going to be part of it. And so it was like, okay, I'll give this a shot, and I did, and I plopped down my $9.95 on demand or in demand, whatever it was at the time.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the first show. Speaking of Ricky Steamboat, he was there. And then I decided to get the second show, and I loved the second show. It was more focused on what they called the X division at the time, which is a new concept of a cruiserweight division, but without having to be a cruiserweight. Just a lot of high flying. And I loved that it was focused on that. And I got hooked, and I watched, like I said, almost every single weekly pay-per-view. I videotaped them all. I converted them to DVD. Actually, at the time, I was using a DVD recorder to record the shows. So I'd literally record onto a DVD as the show was happening. And I have almost all those still to this day. It's pretty fun.
I want our listeners to know that was not in the notes, and I did not set Brian up before I asked him that he just knows that. But I knew you would, because I knew your background with this, and I love that, man, that you remember all of that stuff so vividly. That's awesome.
Okay, so some background. I ran one of the top 3 wrestling forums for TNA wrestling when it first came out. My website was the TNArevolution.com. We had a big forum. There were thousands of people that were on it. People would have discussions all the time about TNA wrestling and everything else and other things. And then I ran a website, TNA Revolution, along with it. And that one, I think we ran until like 2011, somewhere around there, before I finally gave it up and gave it to another guy who was helping me at the time to run. And unfortunately, it's no longer around. But that's how I got started in this, and I got real big into this promotion, and I was behind it 100% through the ups and downs and everything else. And so, I eventually wanted to write a book about it, the early years of TNA, and I actually did a whole ton of research. I wrote a bunch of chapters and then just never did anything with it. So I retained that knowledge because of it was with the company I decided to lay my hat on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when I met you, you had that website going, and
Yep.
I would pilfer through it and go like, okay, so now I can follow what you're talking about, and stuff, which is I think is great. I wish you would go back and think about that book at some point, man. I think you probably could still do it, at this point. But it's neat though, from again from the outsider perspective here to hear all of that, because had I really still been invested in wrestling at that point in my life, I would have been looking for an alternative too, because I liked some of the WWF content at the time and stuff, but I was definitely in the Monday Night Wars. I had picked WCW, and I hung in there
Mhm.
until the bitter end.
Yeah,
And I
so did I.
watched that last Nitro and just knew what was going to go down. Because at that point, the internet was such that was the dirt sheet. That I could get a hold of, so you knew what was coming,
Yep.
and to see it go down the way it did, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be." And I think I had tuned into some of the stuff when they brought some of the WCW stars over, and I'll never forget. I don't remember exactly the setup of it, but Booker T ended up in the ring with The Rock, and The Rock spun around and looked at him and just said, "Who the hell are you?" And I thought, "Oh God," and
Yeah.
I know it was kind of a rib, and all that stuff at the time, but jeez, man, I remember watching that at the time and just being like, "Oh, that's exactly what I thought it was going to be like." It's like when your favorite player gets traded to the big franchise and you're like, okay, yeah, they're now out of this small market. They're going to do great. And they're just buried on the roster. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh no, you're terrible. And it just kills it for you, right? Or, in modern parlance, the Amazon is pretty much taking control of the James Bond franchise. And I'm like, oh, well, there went that too. It's now gone. So, and I know that dates us a little bit, but whatever. It's the same kind of feeling. So I would have been looking for an alternative too. And I'm glad you found one in this. Because I gotta say, again, having never watched a lot of these things, and going back to it, I was blown away by what they were able to pull off on what is clearly a limited budget.
Yeah.
But there's this show is pretty spectacular. I mean, it's not the best thing I've ever seen, but I can't sit here and tell you honestly that I was not entertained watching it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This whole storyline is really good, and we'll talk a little bit about the whole storyline because I did go back and rewatch all of the different pieces that built this story because it happened over a couple months, basically time frame before they got their match. But yeah, let's go up and do the build up here as we get into this. So the wrestling world was shocked when the WWE unexpectedly released Raven on January 20th, 2003, after he lost a Royal Rumble qualifier to Jeff Hardy. While Raven's tenure in WWE was looked at as wasted, nobody thought he would be let go so abruptly. That said, the wrestling world was rocked 2 nights later when Raven suddenly attacked NWA champion Jeff Jarrett at the conclusion of their January 22nd Wednesday night pay-per-view. Raven would tell the audience that it was his destiny to become the NWA champion and embark on a quest to take the title from Jeff Jarrett. Now, Jeff, on the other hand, had won the NWA championship back on November 20th, 2002, defeating Ron the Truth Killings. That's right, R-Truth was the NWA champion at the time,
Yep.
and Jarrett defeated him with the help of Vince Russo. Russo and him would battle back and forth with Russo's new faction that he called Sex, Sports Entertainment Extreme, through 2003. And with Raven's debut, Jarrett would have to deal with not just Raven, but Raven's Gathering, a group which featured Julio De Niro, Alexis Lurie, which we now know as Mickie James, and the one and only CM Punk.
Yes.
After weeks of attacks and Raven talking about his destiny, the match was finally set for April 30th of 2003.
So I got a question for you here. So Raven's suddenly let go from WWF, or WWE. He's out, and he turns right back around and he's here. And I can't help but wonder if the Jarretts didn't get on the phone with him immediately and go, "Hey, you looking for work? Because we got an angle." And got a way to do it, or if Russo was involved in that. And by the way, I want people to mark this that's twice you've complimented Vince Russo on a show, because I never thought I'd hear those things. But really, like, I want to know, like, if they had not set it up ahead of time, like, Lex Luger and Eric Bischoff years before or something, but if they had gotten in contact with him quick to turn this storyline on so fast.
Well, they had to, right? Because nobody just shows up 2 days later at a company like this that nobody knows. Let's face it, nobody was watching,
Yeah.
and just shows up. Like Raven probably just looked at it as like, okay, cool, I got a payday coming, I'll be there, no problem. Got nothing but time on my hands. And what's even more shocking is that WWF let him go without like a no compete, like,
Hmm.
or they didn't look at TNA as competition.
That was the other thing. I bet they didn't even think about it,
Yeah,
honestly. Like they probably were like, you can't do this, you can't do that. But they didn't even think about this because it was so below the radar. The one thing that this company's got though, and I know it's going to sound hokey because it's just a prop or whatever, but the NWA Championship in wrestling circles still means something to this day, and
yeah,
it still would have meant something then. And so that is an allure. And so
hmm,
having that is a great way to bring a guy like this in. It gives Jarrett an immediate heel to work with. And Raven always was somebody who had a faction, right? He was a faction leader and he was so charismatic and stuff that, yes, that's exactly right. You put him with some other guys, and it's wild to think about, Mickey James and CM Punk are part of
yeah,
that group, kind of earlier on in their days before they really exploded.
yeah. It's fun. Punk was king of Ring of Honor
Hmm.
at the time
Yeah.
that he came in here. He was running the roost over on ROH stuff, and he had a big cult following. So him coming in was pretty cool, and he wasn't there for a very long time, but working with Raven, doing that kind of thing was perfect for him, right? Perfect for the characters, just flowed well together, and it
Yeah,
was
hell yeah.
fun, definitely fun.
Yeah, you can totally see them working together. Mickey James is the one that like just sticks out to me because I only know her as like the Mickey James persona.
Hmm.
And but again, she's still involved with NWA in some ways to this day, I think, or has been in recent years. But it's just wild to think of her in like in this context. But it's cool. It is really cool, and that leads up to the scene. And the setting of these things is the Tennessee State Fairgrounds in Nashville.
Yeah,
I've actually been there, Brian. I don't know if you've ever
me
seen it.
too. Hmm.
Yeah, it's a kind of a neat venue. It's a different venue than what we've talked about before on this show. It's not this. It's a big place, but it's not something that's going to be like Madison Square Garden or the where the Detroit Lions play Ford Field or something like that.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
some of these or the Coliseum or whatever. But is as you talked about is a big show for this company at the time, and they absolutely pulled out all the stops
yeah.
for it. I mean, a great card all the way. They open it with a four-way tag team match. You got Just Incredible and Perry Saturn, Team Extreme. They won the thing because they took out America's Most Wanted, Chris Harris and James Storm, the Disciples of the New Church, Brian Lee, Slash, and the Harris brothers, Don Harris and Ron Harris. Now, some of those names I know, some I don't, but that's a heck of a way to open the show. If you got a chance to watch it again, but I did, and I thought it was awesome.
Those teams, like the Team Extreme, was unfortunately shorter lived than it should have been.
Hmm.
You got to remember a lot of these guys were going through some pretty serious addiction problems during this time.
Yes, yes, they
But
were.
they came in, it was all part of, again, it's going to be part of the Raven storyline and everything else, ECW, whatever.
Hmm.
America's Most Wanted was at the time one of the greatest tag teams going. In all of wrestling, people loved that tag team, and they were phenomenal. Disciples of the New Church was, of course, Father James Mitchell, or whatever you want to call him, James Vanderberg in WCW. I think he went by James Mitchell in ECW. That was his group, and he's a character, man. I
Hmm.
loved his character. And then the Harris brothers, Ron and Don Harris. What did they call them in well, they were Skull and Eight Ball, right? And
I think so. Yeah.
Disciples of the Apocalypse or something like that in
Yeah.
WWF. And then they were in WCW and they had a different name. I can't remember what it is now. But anyway, they were really good friends with Jeff Jarrett and they did a lot of security for TNA back
Yeah.
at this time. But they were a prominent tag team as well. And yeah, they definitely deliver on that.
A lot of fun. Got a good singles match with Jerry Lynn taking out Christopher Daniels. You get a young AJ Styles tag teaming with D'Lo Brown. They beat David Young and Sonny Sayaki in a tag match. Then there was a four-way elimination match. I love this. Chris Sabin beat Jason Cross, Jimmy Rave, and Shark Boy all in the same thing. Now, I had heard tales of Shark Boy for years, but had never watched it. And then I saw it and I was like, oh, I get it now. I get what this is about. And then a title change in the NWA X title match. You had the Amazing Red beat Kid Cash, which was considered like an upset at the time. It was a bit of a surprise on the card for everybody and should have portended things to come because they were going to flip every title in one night. They were just going to do that one.
Well, they had nights where they did flip a lot of titles in one night. But yes, this great card. Some of these people, Sonny Siaki was absolutely phenomenal. He was like a younger version of The Rock, cocky,
Yeah.
arrogant, just really stood out. Good worker, everything. And I don't know what ended up happening with him. because he had such a bright future and then he just suddenly disappeared. I should look into that actually and figure out what did happen to him, but I don't remember what the circumstances were. But he had a great run with TNA for like 2 years, and he's just fantastic to watch. He had all the gifts, and I just don't know why it never worked out for him.
Yeah,
Chris Sabin.
he spent some time in WWE for a little while, and then just kind of bounced around the independent circuit for a little bit, and then retired in the early 2000s and stuff like that. I saw a footnote on Wikipedia that he appeared on Family Feud with
Oh,
his
there you go.
family at one point. So I guess he's doing something else now. But yeah, you look at the dude, and you're right. He looks like Rocky Maivia.
Yeah,
He could have been in
he
there,
had the
but.
charisma and everything. It was a
Yeah.
shame that you didn't make it bigger
And
in
maybe
this
maybe
industry.
that's why, because you already had that,
Could
and
be.
Vince was definitely behind Rock. So
Yeah. Jimmy Rave, God rest his soul, no longer with us, unfortunately. But a phenomenal worker back in the day. Jason Cross, I don't know if anything ever happened with him either. He was around for a short time. Chris Sabin, of course, we know, is in the Motor City Machine Guns
oh
today.
yeah.
Big time TNA guy. That was a guy who they built up big time and made a star. And
Hmm.
now happy to see him finally in WWE working as well, because he spent a long time in TNA, a long time. Shark Boy, hilarious character. He was doing the Austin thing at this point, I believe.
Hmm.
Shark, yeah, and things like that. But a fun guy. And then, of course, we have Amazing Red, who was spectacular. Again, another guy who never really got a shot in the big times, but should have, because he's phenomenal. I believe he's still wrestling to this day. Kid Cash, of course, had a really good run as a tag team with Dallas, who we now know as Lance Archer from AEW.
Hmm.
And yeah, that was good times. Good times.
Oh, really good stuff. But out of all of that pile, though, I'm going to tell you, and maybe it's a little. I'm primed because I know what he is now, and I've seen so much of his career, in particularly in WWE. But you see AJ Styles, and you just
Hmm.
like, that's a star. Like that dude just has all of it. And
I,
even at that point, he was still so good. I mean, he was green as heck, but he was so good.
He was the biggest standout that they had. He and Jerry Lynn had a feud for the ages at the beginning of TNA. Like they fought over that X Division title over and over. And then you throw Loki in there, who's another wrestler who had a short stint with WWF at the time. I think he was
Mhm.
Senshi or something like that. I think was
Yeah.
his character in there. Those three built that X division into what it is, what it was, and what it
Hmm.
became. All that. Those Jerry Lynn
Well,
is the true like superstar that helped make put TNA on the map.
and I remember AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels having good matches too.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
maybe we'll get around to one of those one day. But yeah, I remember some of those as some of the few times I tuned in to see anything. And again, when AJ Styles came on, on the big scene, I'd say, and in WWE, and I finally got to see him. I had seen enough of him in TNA to know what he was about, and
Yeah.
then I still like him. He has such good energy, and he's just a good worker, and by all accounts, is a really good dude. And I've spent some time in his hometown in Georgia a few times, so
Nice.
I've seen the signs on the road and stuff. So good to see him still working. But all that is the lead up to this thing, and I mean, it's at a friggin' fairgrounds, man. That's what's wild. And I mean, it took me back to like my days, like my band's playing the fairgrounds, and then seeing wrestling at the fairgrounds. I've mentioned Millennium Wrestling Alliance before; they did some fairground stuff, and even to this day, I can go north of me here in Matthews, North Carolina, and catch a wrestling group that's just hanging out like on the side of what used to be a fairgrounds, but it's now like a bunch of gentrified apartments and restaurants and stuff. But they'll just set up in the parking lot and just have wrestling, and it's a
Yep.
blast. It's fun to watch. And so I love the setting. I love the vibe of it. Because I think you told me offline like there's like concerts there and stuff like that. I think I maybe even knew that in another life or whatever. But I give the production credit for making sure they captured the sound in an arena where it's known to bounce in places. Fairgrounds
Yeah.
a lot of times like rodeos and stuff like that, which are great, but you don't care about the noise. And in this one, they had done a good job of keeping all that together. So you feel the vibe of the crowd, like the energy is there for this. And by the time we get to this main event, you can definitely feel it, and it comes off on the presentation too.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically a big ass empty room, right? They have like conventions and stuff there and different things. It's a big floor. So they had to literally build the seating areas and all that stuff around it to really
Hmm.
hold that sound and everything in. And it's a really cool site. I did go to a show back in 2004, and it was a really cool, fun venue to kind of see how they put it together and watch a show at. It wasn't bad at all, but really cool place. We do have to mention that up until this time, TNA had been doing okay. They had a big lawsuit with their previous pay-per-view people over misreporting numbers. They were told that they were selling like 50 to 60,000 pay-per-views a week when it was actually more like 10 to 12,000 a
Wow.
week. So when they budgeted, they were overpaying for everything because of that. So they got screwed over by their old pay-per-view rep, Jay Hassman, and that's a big story to itself. But this show locally would draw people in, right? They would get decent sized crowds. Now, this was the biggest show they ever did up to this point, and it drew a huge crowd. It filled the whole stadium, and I believe that it held about 1,100 people inside. And they had people they had to turn away. I think they said they turned away around 300 to 400 people outside because they had no place for them to watch the show.
It's a good problem to
That's
have.
how in demand that this event was. That's how big this story was to a wrestling crowd and people who would come willy-nilly to these shows every Wednesday.
Well, I mean, again, you've got two people that everyone knew from the most recently defunct, faction or wrestling company, right? That had both had runs in it, and then one had definitely been on WWE, so you'd seen that. And the thing about Raven stuff, if you saw any of the ZCW stuff too, is you never knew what was coming next. The dude would go out there, as those guys tended to want to do, and you put him in a ring with a guy like Jeff Jarrett, who's very much like old school, but in the new day, but he's very much
Mm-hmm.
part of a previous generation of wrestlers because of his lineage and his history, right? He's more in that Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Barry Windham, those kind of guys. It's sort of more the way he worked versus the way somebody like Raven works. He's very new, and for the time, very new age and very extreme. You've got all that, and a lot of that too is you've got the Vince Russo influence on it too, which was all about you never know what's coming. Crash TV, like you mentioned before, nothing for him to flip every title over in one night and then flip them back the next week, And so there's always some bit of unknown coming. And I gotta say, the thing about this match that gets me is how quick we get color. Both guys bust up, and then they go through a hell of a like handcuff spot for a long time in this, with a lot of people running. There's a lot of extreme things happening, and I didn't know that that's what this match was going to be, and that TNA did that kind of stuff. And honestly, that Jeff Jarrett did that kind of stuff. I just don't remember him doing those kind of things. But even seeing it here, I still think it does fit into kind of his motif of sort of that old school, really work the crowd kind of wrestler. And then you've got Raven going here. But I got a question for you, Brian, because I don't know the history, or who's the face in the match and who's the heel, because they both do heel shit this whole match.
Okay, so Jeff Jarrett is the face,
Wow.
Raven is the heel.
Okay.
I have a theory.
Please.
After WCW, that with the 100th run that Jarrett had in WCW when he came in with the stroke. So the end of his WWF run in 90 whatever. Anytime Jeff Jarrett had short hair, like we're talking the cropped hair, he was a bad guy. Anytime it was long, no
Flowing
matter how
locks.
long, right, he was a good guy. And that happened. That happened starting in WWF back in the late 90s when he came in there. Before that, he always had the long glowing locks, and he would, do the struts and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Once he chopped his hair off and became a heel in WWF, every time he had short hair, he was a heel, and then he would grow it out as he became a face, right? And then if you ever saw him come out with the short hair, you knew he was turning heel.
Oh, that's a great tell. I had
Just
no
how
idea.
just how he worked. It was really weird how that happened. Now it doesn't work that way now because he likes
Yeah.
the long hair, but
Yeah.
for a few years there in TNA, when he came out with short hair, he was the bad guy. When he came out with longer hair, he was the good guy.
Okay, because I mean, Raven has never been anything but a heel. That's kind of his whole persona, anyway.
Yeah, I
So
think he was like a face for a minute or two, but
that would not have worked, and it
No.
didn't work when he did it. I remember that. But Jarrett is that kind of when the few times when they would turn Ric Flair face. in NWA and WCW. You know, he was so over it didn't matter anyway. But every now and then they would. At the end of the Steamboat feud, they had Terry Funk power drive him through a table so that Funk
Yep.
could be the heel for a while, and then Flair was the face until they turned on Sting, and the rest is history. But I always felt that it was interesting when you had guys that clearly were naturally heels, but for storyline purposes had to play the face. But that's what's wild about this is when you get two guys who really are heel, and is you're going to get heelish stuff the whole match, And these guys waste no time going at each other, man. They start wiping each other out pretty quick.
Well, I mean, and based on the storyline too, like Raven had basically been attacking Jarrett constantly, or having Julio and Alexis and CM Punk attack him or anything, like constantly interrupting. He stole his title the first night, and they got into a feud over that, and he just basically taunted Jarrett the whole time. So Jarrett finally has a chance to get revenge here, basically, and that's why the intensity is huge. Like you hear it in the crowd; they're just amped up for this, and you can hear fans cheering for both of them at different times and all that, and just everyone was so invested in this. I remember to this day, it's just like yesterday watching this for the first time on pay-per-view and just being so hyped up. I was with my brother-in-law. We were watching it upstairs in my house on the TV, and we were just like, oh, we were on our feet, man. It was so exciting. And you could feel the crowd was just totally into this, and they did a damn good job with this match, like putting it together and building it back and forth, and having Jarrett take over Raven for a while, Raven then beating the tar out of Jarrett. They got blood real fast.
Yeah,
like both of them busted open very quickly into this match, which Jarrett has always said, color equals money, right? And so they brought that there, and we see that. And they just had a back and forth brawl that was just absolutely fantastic.
And you get a lot of the good Raven climaxes too. You get the sleeper and the drops, and he's always setting up something for the next out of control move. He keeps taunting in that DDT. He's going to get that in. That's his big move. And I don't know, the fact that they. Sometimes when a match goes out of the ring too much, it just gets annoying because you're like, come on, let's get. I mean, I get what you're doing, but get it back in the thing. But this one never felt. It never felt like it was out of place. Like they were still telling story the whole time. And
I think a lot of that is credit to De Niro and Alexis as well, getting involved in the match from time to time. And what's funny is that Raven had the Raven's rules, right? Which means anything goes.
Right.
Yet they still played it off as if the ref can't see them do these dastardly deeds for a while. And then eventually, they got caught, and I think it was Julio De Niro came flying off the top with a chair and missed, and referee's right there seeing it, and then just let it go. But
it's Raven's rules.
It's Raven's rules, so it shouldn't matter. So I thought that was kind of funny. They did a great job interacting. I love when Alexis is checking on Raven after Jarrett puts him through the table at the elbow drop.
Yeah.
And then she backs away when Raven comes. Just fantastic work on all of them. And then, of course, we get Rudy Charles, who we now know as Dan Engler for WWE. I always call him Rudy Charles because he's always been Rudy Charles to me. He throws out De Niro and Alexis Lurie, and we get the ref bump, right? Takes the ref out. And my favorite is the guy in the crowd saying, "Get up, ref! Come on! Get the fuck back in the ring!"
Exactly, yelling at him from the outside. I know, but that at the time, I can only imagine that would have been probably somebody that was really into ECW, because that's an ECW crowd thing. It's a little, I'm not as close to them as some other friends that we have, but I watched enough of it to know that's what that crowd was like, and it felt very much like that. It's like, well, we imported a little Philly crowd to Nashville. It looks
and the favorite is, though, the guy kept poking and prodding at him, like, get up. And
it's like
Rudy
they
had to sit there the whole time.
Do something, and he's just sitting there having to take, hey, go to the ref, though. He's like, nope, I'm going to sell.
That's good.
Well,
and then, of course, we get the big run in.
Yeah, exactly. You got to have the big run in, right? So, but I love how that gets countered too in this match. This was so much fun. Is like, because if you're going to have that, you have to have people that will come and defend the face at some point, right? He's got friends in low places too, is the idea, and you have this more or less bar brawl going on in the ring before they're able to get through it, and I love that. I thought it was good.
Yeah, so we first have Sports Entertainment Extreme coming out to interfere on behalf of Raven, only to get stopped by Father James Mitchell's crew and the disciples, or well, the Harris brothers, and they get into a brawl, takes it back, and then out comes the Team Extreme. We had New Jack, Sandman, and just Incredible attacking Raven, who's
Yeah.
handcuffed. They did a nice super kick concerto to him, which
Yes.
was badass, I gotta say.
Yes. That was really good.
And then out comes Sabu, and he attacks Team Extreme. And my favorite is Mike Tenay says, "Why isn't Sabu helping Team Extreme?"
Yeah.
Well, what's that? Okay, because they're all in ECW, they should all be together, I guess. I don't know.
I guess that was the idea.
Shut
right?
up, Mike.
Right? I know. But I got to say, though, this is the first time we called it. Mike today's doing a hell of a job.
Oh,
Yeah.
Don West. The people hated him, and I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah.
And he played his part so well because Jarrett basically told him, just go out there and be a fan. React as if you're a fan. And that's
Yes.
what he did. He wasn't your typical color commentator guy. He was just there reacting to things that were happening and made it better, I thought.
It's kind of early of Mauro Ronaldo. You know,
Yeah.
when early NXT, that drew me to that in a lot of ways was just Mauro was just being one of us. You know,
Yeah,
just
he's a
freaking
fan.
out,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And he was awesome. And he's still great calling MMA and boxing to this day. Someday I hope Mauro can come back to wrestling because he's just so much fun. But it doesn't need to be the big stuff. Like you put him in like, you know, NXT, you know, that he's perfect for that kind of thing. But
Absolutely.
no, I love that. I love the guy wiping people out in the crowd, you know, who did
Oh,
not expect it.
Sabu knocked someone silly.
I was
man.
like, that lady is not happy. So she got hit in the face.
She got autographs and pictures all night after that. I guarantee
Uh-huh.
you.
And-
Yep,
and-
they said, "I want you to come back on stage and meet the guys." Yeah,
And
come
in
on.
fact, would you like to come back every time we do one of these for the next
Yeah.
5 years?
Just
No
don't sue
problem.
us.
Also, here's a gift card. Pay for it at home if you can't make it. 'Cause but I mean, you know, that kind of stuff happens. I do like, again, the elbow drop through the table, you know, and I love Jarrett reversing. I want to ask your opinion. I know people don't like this stroke as a move. I kind of like it. I think it's pretty good. It's no different than like the skull crushing finale and some of these other things. I'm a sucker
it's
for the
exactly
side Russian leg
like
sweep
this.
anyway. And,
Yeah.
So when you reverse it, sure, that works for me. I dig it. It's a face plant. It's a fine move.
It was good. Here's the thing: like Raven had to unlock Jarrett from the handcuffs because Rudy Charles couldn't get
couldn't get
damn
to work.
things done. So he goes, "I'll do it," and he uncuffs him and says, "There you go, come on." But that sets up the end, and like I say, he gets hit with one even flow DDT, kicks out, and then he goes for a second one, and that's when Jarrett hits the stroke. I don't mind the stroke. I think the stroke is just fine for a finishing move. I don't think it should be as devastating as they make it be, but again, it's pretty much the same thing as a skull crushing finale.
But at the end of this match and reversing it out of that even flow,
Yeah.
it was a good like chain move. I was like, I love chain move endings like that. I think it's fun, and you can
Yeah.
tell they worked it out, and it doesn't look like they did. It's very slick, it's quick, and I love it. It's almost like a stolen finish, and it's weird to see a face get a stolen finish, but it's fun, you know. And
Yeah,
at that
and
point,
I
you
can
don't think
tell
it's
you.
going down, you know.
Yeah, I can tell you, we were watching this and all being like, Raven's going to win the title. Raven's going to win the title. And then that happened. And then you went, oh my God, Jeff's going to retain. And sure enough, he did. And it was just like, why? Yeah, why? And you could see now, you see all the shit coming in from the crowd. That all came from that one section, that heel section. Yep. They threw everything they had on them into that ring. They were so pissed off at the outcome, and you can see as they pan away, they're all holding up middle fingers at Jeff Jarrett as he's celebrating the championship win, right? They were pissed. They were so mad, and the repercussions that came out of this were that they were pretty much banned from sitting in that section for the rest of TNA's time there. They had to disperse. They weren't allowed to do that, and so it was kind of a they didn't want their top babyface to be reacted that way from the crowd, and basically he was given a heel reaction when he won, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it would take a little while before he would lean into that heel reaction, but he eventually would. They tried to win him back over, but yeah.
Well, and I get why he's doing the face thing right now, but the move would have been that then he comes back out as the heel the next
That's
time.
what it should have been.
Yeah, but it
they
wasn't.
They didn't do that yet. They didn't do
screwed
that
that
for a
up.
little while yet. They did
And
screw that up.
And I think that's why people are, in retrospect, the people who are pissed about this match and the ending of it are still pissed about it because they just kept going with it the way it was. It's like, oh, he can't be beat. Fine, of course he can't, and it just becomes it's almost like the way people felt about the Kansas City Chiefs, for a long time. Like, well, great, it's just going to be another one of these, and it just,
Yeah.
it goes on too long. And, they eventually, he would flip it, the belt would come off, and he would, flip back to heel and stuff. But we both teasing it there. I mean, I think we both kind of think that should have happened pretty quick. He should have gone back heel and maybe even dropped the belt.
Yeah. Well, he will in a couple months. But it was one of those things where you really wanted to see Raven get the title, especially after 2.5 months of build, talking about it being his destiny, and fans were getting behind him. They wanted to see the change. And you could have done the change and then had Jarrett win it back a couple weeks later or whatever you want to do, and that would have probably been fine. But to have him go over just like he did like that was just kind of deflating. And I think, unfortunately, it lost him a lot of crowd and fans and support because of that, which is too bad. But I think came back, but they were pretty upset for a while.
You're onto something there. And when you build up a heel like this, right, and you come to this match or whatever, this isn't going to be the last time that they meet, obviously, right? So why not let him take the belt? Because you could always pull it back off of him later, right? Like that was my fantasy booking question. Is like they really should have pulled the belt off of him. They should have gone ahead and done that, because it kills the heel's momentum when now, like, oh, you did all of that for nothing, basically.
Yeah.
And like that to me is the unfortunate part of this, is that, oh, well, we just did all that, and now, like, when you do want to put it on him, who cares? Like, you already killed the good build.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But this is the fantasy booking wise. Yeah, you have Raven win. You have Jarrett disappear for a month because he's so beat up by this match, and then come back and you reignite the feud, and that's when you can put it back on Jeff Jarrett. That's what I would have done personally, but it didn't happen. And for good, it's good it didn't happen in some ways, because in 2 months AJ Styles is going to win the NWA Championship against Jeff Jarrett and Raven in a 3-way. And that'll be his first World Championship win, and that was a good thing, and that really made AJ into a superstar.
It meant,
however, that could have been delayed a little while longer, and we could have gone a different route. But and that's just how it is. But if I were fantasy booking this, Raven would have won the championship that night.
Yeah.
And Jarrett would have disappeared for a little bit, come back, and then maybe taken it back or gone with the original plan, which was to put the belt on AJ a different way.
Well, and that leads to, where does all this lead for TNA and for Raven and Jarrett? Where does it go to here?
So they would continue to feud a little bit here and there. AJ Styles, a few weeks back, had inserted himself into the picture with Raven and Jarrett in a very good, I would say, go back and watch, a very good back and forth between those two, in which Jarrett likes to mention the needles in Raven's arms and things like that. It's very entertaining back and forth between those two. But he inserted himself about a month or two back, and that would continue on. And they would meet, I believe it was on, I want to say June 11th or something like that. And they would meet against each other, and that's when AJ would win the championship, and he would start his first run. Fast forward a little while, Jarrett will get the belt back eventually. In 2004, they would go on to Fox Sports Net with their Impact TV show. The Impact would become a show. And a year later, they would lose that television network, and they would go dark for a short period of time. Okay, so Raven would finally win the NWA Championship, but it would happen at an odd time for TNA. They just lost the Fox Sports Net contract. They were no longer on TV anymore, and he would win the title at their biggest show, technically every year, Slammiversary, right? It's like their WrestleMania. It's their anniversary show that they throw it on. He won it in a King of the Mountain match, which we will definitely need to cover a King of the Mountain match at some point, because I'm dying to hear your opinion of that match, because it is some weird stuff
I
that they
don't know
keep.
what that is, but it sounds awful.
Oh man, it is like, yeah, we're gonna have to cover it because it is just, it's something
Stay
Russo came up with, and
tuned
it's
to Main
interesting.
Event Maniacs for that. Yeah.
Yeah, so he would win it at that point, and then he would hold on to the championship basically the whole time that TNA had no television, all the way into, I believe it was September, right after the Unbreakable pay-per-view. He would then drop the title back to Jeff Jarrett at a house show, and not a TNA house show, a Canadian house show,
What?
at a wrestling company called Border Champion. I think it was Border Championship Wrestling or something like that. That was run by Scott D'Amore, who had then become pretty famous in TNA as a behind the scenes kind of guy, and then a on air director of authority kind of guy in the later years. But that's how they kind of did it. It was really weird. Like there was no TV. I mean, they had episodes they were doing of Impact, but they only aired on their website. And then sometimes in regional markets that had like the Explosion TV on those like channels that nobody ever watched. And so that was kind of his thing. They kind of gave him the title, but nobody could see it. During that dark period of time, Jarrett would drop the NWA Championship to Raven, but not on a TNA show. It would be on a BCW show up in Canada that nobody could watch.
Wow.
And Raven would become champion of TNA at that time. So Raven was the NWA champion during the dark period of time that TNA did not have a pay-per-view or a TV show before they finally got the Spike TV deal, I believe it was. And then the title would go again, I think, back to Jarrett before that happened. But he did eventually drop it to him. Just took a while.
Well, what's fun is that in June of 2023, Jarrett and Raven were in a tag team match against Shane Douglas and Glenn Disco Inferno Gilberti for a little bit. I haven't seen that one. I kind of want to go dig it up and check it out now if it's out there somewhere because I can only imagine what that's like. And there's a lot of multi-man matches with these guys before they wrestled on and off throughout 2004, 5, and 6. They would circle around each other, here and there.
Raven was great. And here's the reason that he did not win the championship. He didn't win the championship because he wouldn't sign a long-term deal with TNA. He wanted the independents to go wherever he wanted to go, and because he wouldn't sign a deal with TNA, they couldn't trust putting the belt on the guy, just to have the belt put on him. So that's why they didn't do it. When he finally did, that's when they eventually would put the belt on him. But yeah, so that's kind of the reasoning behind that.
No, it makes total sense at that point because you got to protect business a little bit. I mean, I get that. So, and to Raven's point, I get it too. He's in demand, so he may have opportunities to go elsewhere. And it wasn't at a time when you wanted to trade your belt off on somebody else's promotion, at least not on this level. So, wasn't something they were going to do.
Yeah, and so like I said, he would win the title at a BCW event, Border City Wrestling, which I believe was run by Scott D'Amore, who would then years later, be a huge name in TNA wrestling behind the scenes. And then Raven would lose the belt to Jeff Jarrett in October, which I believe was right before they went on to Spike TV. Yeah. So he was champion for a short period of time during the blackout period. And that was how it went. But yeah, unfortunately, we didn't get to see a lot of Raven as champion.
Well, that brings us to final bell here and final thoughts on this match, Brian. So I'm going to start on that though, because again, being kind of the newbie to this and really the newbie on much of this episode, I have to say, for what it's worth, I liked everything in the match. Even though I disagree with the way the ending goes and it should have gone somewhere else, I'm still pretty satisfied with it. It's still pretty good. It's entertaining. It's fun. And I want to emphasize this, that if you compare to what's going on in the WWE at the time, this is definitely an alternative to that promotion. So if you wanted something a little grittier, but not as maybe in the dirt as CCW could get, or as rough as some of that could be, this was your jam. And if you didn't have access to something like ROH or New Japan or something at the time, this would have been a good alternative. And I get why it hit. And even though people don't like the ending and maybe we disagree with who should have walked out of there with the belt and stuff, they're still talking about it today. So obviously it did what it was supposed to do, which was to set up a lot of stuff, get the story going, and it got people excited for it. So I give it a pass for that and think it's definitely worth revisiting. And if you haven't caught it, it's one to go back and get a look at and see the way that two guys with very different styles and very different opinions on how wrestling should go can come together and really tell a good story in the ring.
I agree 100%. This was a fantastic match. They told a really good story in this match. It was never dull. They kept the action up the whole time. It was fun. It was good. And even though back in the day I was disappointed in the outcome, watching it was really entertaining to watch it again and just enjoy it for what it was, knowing what the outcome was going to be. I like it. I think it's one of the better early TNA main events that they ever did. And yeah, I would definitely recommend, if you can, go and find it. I think you can find it online.
And yeah, it's on YouTube, and there's a Facebook group that has it. It's all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely worth your time watching it. Yeah, go for it, man. It's fun.
Absolutely. And of course, we've had a lot of fun here talking about it on Main Event Maniacs, a show that you will find on this very feed from time to time here at the Juice Box. Feel free to connect with Juice on Twitter and X at Juicy Steen, Instagram at Juicy Wrestling Closet, and of course, subscribe to that YouTube channel at Juicy Steen. Juice has got so much good stuff going on here in 2025. Lots of new shows, lots of great wrestling content. Of course, this show on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, all those kind of things. And hey, if you get a chance, leave a positive review and rating. It always helps people find the show. Share it on your socials as well, because we really appreciate the support.
And if you want to follow myself or Jay, you can do so on X. Jay is at JRanHere, and I am at BrianThomas878. Send us your thoughts on the episode, suggestions for any future episodes you'd like to see us cover. We're always looking for different main events that maybe we haven't thought of, that maybe you want to hear us comment on. And yeah, we look forward to interacting with everybody.
Absolutely. So for Brian, I'm Jay, and until next time, this has been your main event.
That was The Juice Box with Juice Springsteen. Make sure to subscribe to The Juice Box wherever you listen to podcasts.